see you.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney+. It's the film critics are calling the best Avatar yet.
Yeah! Go, 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 go!
A true epic and completely jaw-dropping.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
Return to Pandora on Disney+.
It will be an adventure for the whole family.
And watch the Oscar-winning phenomenon at home.
This is sick!
Avatar: Fire and Ash, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
My best-known book is Fingerprints of the Gods, the evidence of Earth's lost civilization, that was published in 1995, actually. So we're coming up to 20 years after Fingerprints of the Gods was published. And I presented a massive dossier of evidence back in 95 that there had been a major forgotten episode in human history, that we are a species with amnesia, and that we've lost track of something incredibly important that happened in our past, and which is now remembered only in myths, not really in any recorded history. So I tried to set that right in Fingerprints of the Gods. Now, what has happened in the last 20 years is that a whole raft of new evidence has come out into the public domain in support of my original thesis. And this evidence takes many different forms. It takes sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is, by mainstream archaeology, and most of my critics are mainstream archaeologists, mainstream archaeology admits that Göbekli Tepe is 12,000 years old. So when I was arguing that there was a civilization more than 12,000 years ago, that seemed an improbable idea in 1995. But now when we see a gigantic megalithic complex like Göbekli Tepe emerging in Turkey, it adds enormously to my case. Similarly, in 1995, I knew there had been a giant cataclysm 12,500 years ago, approximately, and that it was connected to the end of the last ice age. But I didn't absolutely have a smoking gun. And I do now have a smoking gun. We know that the Earth was hit by a comet 12,980 years ago, and that changed everything in the human story. So there's just masses and masses of new evidence, and what I'm working on is a completely new book, not a revised edition of Fingerprints of the Gods, but a completely new book presenting the new evidence that has emerged since 1995. What I'm referring to is a cataclysm so bad that, as Plato put it when he passed down to us the story of Atlantis, that mankind had to begin again like children with no memory of what went before. That's what I'm talking about. Our memory banks were wiped, our records were wiped, and most of the evidence was wiped. Sea level at that time rose by 400 feet. 10 million square miles of land went underwater. I mean, this was a giant cataclysm. So I don't actually think I need to look into genetics to explain why we lost our memory. If a similar cataclysm overtook our civilization today, we too would have to begin again like children with no memory of what went before. What's interesting is that in those 20 years, I have taken an excursion into another area of interest, which is the whole mystery of human consciousness and what our consciousness is. And, you know, science doesn't really have a satisfactory explanation of consciousness. We know it's connected to the brain in some way, but exactly, you know, the general sort of default view is that the brain makes consciousness, but it may be much more complicated than that. The brain may be more like a transceiver or a receiver of consciousness. So I've done a whole lot of work in that field as well, and I intend to bring that work also to bear on the new inquiry into the lost civilization, because I think that the civilization we lost was very different from ours today. Ours is totally about mechanical advantage. It's about material tech, And I think that we're looking at a civilization that was much more focused upon the powers of the mind, that was the civilization we lost. And that's why we don't find a whole lot of technological remnants of it. Our civilization has let the powers of the mind really not be focused on, and has focused more on mechanical and technological advances. And it's often rightly said that we only use a tiny fraction of our minds, a tiny fraction of our consciousness. And I think the ancients knew better how to work with this amazing gift that the universe has given us. I've been traveling the world for the last 3 years, but hey, it's great, that we can have one person in Sweden and another person in England and another person in the United States, and we're all talking to each other. We got to say that this tech we've created is pretty amazing thing. But how much better it would all be if we could just do it by telepathy. Yes, I do. I think that's a latent human faculty which has been allowed to lapse in our society because we focus totally on the material side of things. And we've done incredibly well focusing on the material side of things. But I think it's time to wake up to our other abilities and our other potential. We don't have the experience of this, but we do have a tremendous amount of suggestive material in ancient myths and traditions. For example, the Popol Vuh of the Maya talking about people from different lands being in contact with one another at the level of thought, which is very suggestive in this area and makes us think. I know if you look at the work of somebody like my colleague Rupert Sheldrake, a scientist in his own right, but is open to extraordinary ideas, he has thoroughly documented, to my satisfaction at least, the existence of telepathic abilities in the world today, that people do have these abilities. It's just in most of us that they're suppressed. So I don't think it's a big stretch to suggest that there might have been a time when these abilities were much more advanced, and not only telepathy but also telekinesis. Maybe we could move things, move material things with the power of the mind. And then we hark back to traditions of Egyptian priests singing those gigantic megaliths into place, not lifting them up with cranes or forklift trucks, but using somehow the power of the mind and the power of sound to lift those megaliths. So I think these are all interesting areas to inquire into, and I intend to get into them. In Turkey, to Indonesia twice, to India, to Armenia, to Lebanon. I mean, my God, those big blocks of stone at Baalbek, 1,000-ton blocks of stone, where I've just come back from Lebanon, unbelievable. We look at those and are just awestruck, but somehow the ancients moved those, and it's absolute nonsense to suggest that the Romans were involved in moving those blocks of stone, as many modern archaeologists claim. We'll be talking about it, and also Peru, Bolivia. I've just been traveling a lot and looking at ancient sites with hopefully a fresh eye, and I intend to bring a lot of new evidence to the table. No, not really. Actually, it was a delight to visit Lebanon. I mean, we hear about the terrible problems and crises in Lebanon, and it's true that the country has an unstable border with Syria, and that the problems in Syria are spilling over into Lebanon. And as it happens, Baalbek is right on that border, and it's been hit by rocket attacks. But when I was there, I saw no problems, and it was very easy to work the site because the site wasn't absolutely heaving with tourists. It was very quiet, and it was possible to explore it and be awestruck by it and just stand still in silence and amazement and look at those incredible things. I was horrified on my latest visit, which was just 3 weeks ago, by what the archaeologists have done to Göbekli Tepe. They have desecrated the site, in my view. Having finished their archaeological work on it, these archaeologists hate tourists, and having finished their archaeological work on it, they've just done everything they can to make it as miserable an experience as possible for tourists who visit the site. They've built a huge wooden roof over it. Because the roof would blow away in the wind, they've then weighed it down with tons and tons of stone that are actually piled up in the enclosures where the pillars of Göbekli Tepe are. You can hardly see the ancient site of Göbekli Tepe anymore because of what the archaeologists have done. To my mind, it deserves the term vandalism. And there's no respect for its sacred nature. I understand the need to protect these sites, but that site, since they first began to excavate it in 1995 or 1996, has been open to the elements since then. And now, when they finish their work and don't need protection anymore from the elements themselves, they've completely covered it up and made it a miserable place for any traveler to visit. You just can't have the experience that was possible even a year ago there. That was deliberately buried by the people who made it. It was buried 10,000 years ago, 2,000 years after it was created, and it remained buried until 1995 when the excavations of the German Archaeological Institute began. They buried it for a later civilization to find it and figure it out, just like we might, if we wanted to leave a record of who we were and what we are, we would put it in the ground and cover it up and bury it until such a time as it was revealed again. That time is coming now. This is a time of miracles and wonders. This is a time when that which has been hidden for thousands of years is emerging and coming out into the public view and cannot be hidden much longer, partly thank you to our internet, which is meaning that it's very difficult for the powers that be to keep secrets anymore. As long as the archaeologists are honest with us, I think what's going to happen in the next 20 years is a complete rewriting of our history. It's already happening with a site like Göbekli Tepe. It's happening at a site called Gunung Padang in Indonesia that I'd made 2 visits to in the last 4 months. An extraordinary man-made pyramid, which appears to be more than 20,000 years old, sitting there 3 hours drive from Bandung in Indonesia. And Indonesia, the Indonesian islands stand at the southern edge of what was once a gigantic continent during the Ice Age, which was submerged when the sea levels rose. So very, very interesting things are happening. Yeah, it's a privilege to work in this field, and it's a very exciting time to work in this field. And I'm glad to say that the archaeological predictions that people like John Anthony West, Andy Collins would be gone with the wind, and there's still a huge story to tell.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel, maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
The people who live in Nazlat al-Saman, which is the village directly under the Sphinx, they can't tell you why. Because it's a beautiful, magnificent thing. It's 270 feet long. It's 70 feet high. It towers over the Nile River. It looks out due east over the basin of the Nile, and fundamentally, because it is a worldwide icon, it's something that Egypt rightly is very proud of. Nobody else has the Great Sphinx of Giza. Plenty of people have got pyramids, but nobody else has got the Great Sphinx. So there's a sense of pride. There's a sense of pride for the whole Giza Plateau, that it's something special that Egypt has, which other cultures don't have. When I've talked to Egyptians, local Egyptians living in Nazlat al-Saman, they believe that the Sphinx is much, much older than the time of the dynastic Egyptians. They believe that it's as old as time itself. Well, just look at it. That's why those erosion patterns around the side. There's a sense, a feeling of great antiquity about it. Of course, they're not looking up encyclopedias and going into the archaeological textbooks. They're just giving a gut reaction to this amazing thing. I'll say it exactly. The calculated weight is 6 million tons. The height is presently around 450 feet, but that's because the top 30 feet of the Great Pyramid came off in an earthquake around about the year 1300. So when you calculate the angle of slope, and it's 52 degrees angle of slope on each side, and project it further beyond the broken off top, you'll find that the original height of the Great Pyramid was 481 feet in height. Right now, it's about 450. Well, I would say that this is amongst the most excavated and most studied archaeological sites in the entire world. So it's amazing that they're still finding new things there. For example, there's been using a high-tech scanning equipment, muon scanning, I believe. Just in the last 3 years, enormous cavities have been identified within the Great Pyramid, which nobody knew were there. There's a huge feature, famous feature within the Great Pyramid called the Grand Gallery. And it looks like there's another Grand Gallery above it, which has been identified by scanning, but nobody's got into it yet. Yeah, you can see it in some of those. No, that's the Grand Gallery, but you can also see the scanning there.
Zoom in, right?
But there's the Grand Gallery, and above it is the Scam Pyramid's big void. Nobody knew that was there until very, very recently, and it's not the only void that's in the Great Pyramid. So we're still finding out about new things about the Great Pyramid. Now, that void could be an architectural feature. It appears to slope at the same angle as the Grand Gallery, or it might not be. It might just be. It's hard to understand why a sort of random vacant space would be left in this monument. But the fact is, all we know at the moment is that there's this huge cavity inside the pyramid that nobody has yet got into. And it isn't the only part of the pyramid. Out of the Queen's Chamber, so-called, when we call the chambers of the pyramids Queen's Chamber, King's Chamber, there's no basis for that. There's no evidence that any queen was ever buried in the Great Pyramid, nor is there any evidence that any king, any pharaoh was ever buried in the Great Pyramid, because no pharaonic burial was ever found inside it. But there's the Queen's Chamber, and on the right-hand wall and on the left-hand wall, there are two little shafts cut into the wall. Actually, those shafts were invisible until, I believe it was 1872, when a curious British researcher went around tapping on the walls of the Queen's Chamber. He had a reason to do that, because the King's Chamber, I suspect that's a King's Chamber one.
It is.
Yeah, the King's Chamber shafts were already known. There were shafts in the King's Chamber, and actually you could find their exit on the outside of the pyramid. You could roll a cannonball down them, and they would end up in the King's Chamber. So, but there's no exit for the Queen's Chamber shafts. But he figured, look, if there's shafts in the King's Chamber, maybe there's shafts in the Queen's Chamber too. So he went around tapping on the walls, and sure enough, he found two hollow points. People didn't care about vandalism in those days. He got out a hammer and chisel and just hammered them through. And lo and behold, there's a horizontal passageway, and then it's leading up at an angle. It's about that high and that wide. Let's say 8 inches high and 8 inches wide. It's just very, very small. You can't get a human being in there. But back in the 90s, a special robot was designed, which was sent up there, sent up the southern shaft first. And what it found, after a journey of more than 160 feet, what it found was a door, a little stone door, with two metal handles blocking the shaft. So the question is, what lies beyond that door? A new robot was designed with a drill on the front of it. They send the robot back up the shaft. They drill a hole in that door. What do they see when the camera goes through that hole? They see a cavity about 4 feet wide and another door at the end of that, closed, shut. And of course, they've not been able to drill through that one yet. So it's the same story on the other shaft as well. So what we're getting is evidence that the Great Pyramid still has many secrets to reveal. Years of study. In some ways, you could say thousands of years of study, and you can definitely say 150 years of detailed archaeological study have still not got to the bottom of the mysteries of the Great Pyramid. They've not solved how it was built. That's the establishment date for the construction of the Great Pyramid. I don't have a big problem with that date. I think in the Great Pyramid, we're looking at a multi-generational project. I completely reject the notion that the Great Pyramid was a tomb and only a tomb, which is what Egyptologists say. And I reject the notion that this massive incredibly precise monument, because it is almost perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west, that it could have been built in the 23 years of Khufu's reign. I mean, you don't start building your own tomb until you're actually on the throne. So he was on the throne for 23 years, and that's what Egyptologists say, the pyramid was built in 23 years. I can't accept that. Nobody who's got a background in engineering and construction who I've talked to can accept that either. This thing couldn't be built in 23 years unless there was some kind of extraordinary technology that the ancient Egyptians possessed, which we don't yet know that they possessed. It looks much more likely that it was built up over a long period of time, but that undoubtedly the pharaohs of the fourth dynasty finished it off and put the casing stones that were once on the outside of the Great Pyramid. But I'm of the opinion, and again, this is just my view based on my own research and my own work, is that what stood at the Giza Plateau 12,500 years ago was the Sphinx in the form of a lion. Were some megalithic temples. There's a huge megalithic temple called the Valley Temple right next door to the Great Sphinx. Again, there's nothing that connects it in writing that connects it to any particular epoch, but it has blocks of stone that weigh 100 tons each. Those are also heavily weathered, just as the Sphinx is. So my suggestion is that on the Giza Plateau, you have a number of megalithic temples which still stand. You have the Great Sphinx, and you had ground platforms, not very high, where the three pyramids were built, laid out in a very specific, very precise angle to one another. And that precise angle matches the angle of the, yes, this is the Valley Temple. And what we're looking at there is exactly an interesting point, because you're looking at granite blocks that were put there in Old Kingdom times that face limestone blocks. And it's those limestone blocks that are behind those granite blocks. You can see them if you look right to the back. Mm-hmm. You can see the limestone blocks that haven't been covered with facing stones. So just as we believe that the Sphinx was restored by the pharaohs, we also, I'm speaking of I and my colleagues, are also of the opinion that the Valley Temple was restored by the pharaohs. But what they found was a much, much, much older monument, which they treasured and valued and venerated. You bet. That's exactly what it looks like. It's mountaineering to a certain extent. If you're more than 20 feet up and you fall, you're pretty much certain to be dead. If you're 200 feet up, you definitely will be dead. How people die every year. Yeah, that's right. You come down very carefully. I was actually on one of the climbs that I and my wife Santha did. I was ahead, and I reached up to
pause around.
Some of the blocks right. are only this high. Some of them are almost 6 feet high, and you have to pull yourself up onto them. The courses vary in height from course to course. And I was levering myself. I got hold of the top of a block, and I was pulling myself up onto that so that I could get my knees onto it and get on the top. When the limestone that I was holding, which was very eroded, broke off in my hands, I fell back. Fortunately, my wife was right behind me, and she pushed me very, very hard and stopped me falling. But that could have been the end of me, which many Egyptologists would wish it perhaps had been. The slope is 52 degrees. It's a steep slope. And once you start rolling, you're gone. There's no way. And that's why people get killed. It's a magnificent and majestic place to be. First of all, a sense of relief. I got to the top with, for me, about 25 to 30 minutes to do the climb. There was a gentleman, in fact, the gentleman who helped me with my first climb of the Great Pyramid, who's now passed away. He was known locally as Champion because back in the 1930s and 40s, people used to run races up the Great Pyramid. And he was able to run up the Great Pyramid and do the climb in 11 minutes. Well, I'm not as fit as he was. So in my case, about 25 minutes to half an hour. I need to explain to you what we're actually looking at here. Can I do that?
Yes.
What we're looking at here is the result of an Arab investigation of the Great Pyramid in the 9th century under a caliph called Caliph al-Mamun, who was very curious about antiquities. And he was already aware of other pyramids in Egypt in which the entrance was in the north face. As a matter of fact, the entrance to all Egyptian pyramids is in the north face. But at that time, the true entrance of the Great Pyramid was not visible because all of the sides were sheerly covered sheer with beautiful polished limestone facing stones, some of which individually could weigh as much as 16 tons. They were completely covered and closed the pyramid, and nobody knew where the entrance was. It seems that in ancient times there was a way to open that doorway to open those facing stones and to get in. But nobody knew in the 9th century where it was. So Caliph al-Ma'mun got together a gang of workers with sledgehammers and chisels, and he went up onto the north face of the Great Pyramid, roughly where he thought the door might be, and he started breaking his way in. And what we're looking at here is a man-made tunnel physically forced into the Great Pyramid and generally known as Ma'mun's Hole. You bet. I've walked through it more times than I can count. And that now is the entrance through which tourists enter the Great Pyramid. Oh, it's about 25 feet up, maybe
25 feet up.
Maybe
Okay.
30 feet up. But the true entrance, of course, has now been found, and it's a little bit above Ma'mun's Hole, and you can see that there are slabs of stone in a kind of that sort of shape, like an A figure, which block it. If you search for true entrance to the Great Pyramid, you can see it as well. There it's a little bit above Ma'mun's Hole. But nobody who goes to the Great Pyramid today goes in through that true entrance. They all go in through Ma'mun's Hole. Yeah, that's right. That's actually the real entrance to the Great Pyramid.
El 2026 FIFA World Cup Meal llegó a McDonald's con 9 vasos legendarios. En el lineup tenemos Christian Cipiten Pulisic, David Beckham, Lamine The Dream Yamal, Ronaldinho El Mago, Monsieur Titi Henry, Son Salih Heung-min, Alfonso Fonsi Davis, Santi Bebote Jiménez y en la portería el que no necesita apodo, Grimes.
Llévate uno de 9 vasos legendarios con el FIFA World Cup Meal. En McDonald's participantes solo por tiempo limitado, hasta agotar existencias.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Here's a little tune to help you remember. Same drive, different day. Don't you wish you were getting away? Pack your bags and come on through. Texas, Ohio, Alaska, we're up there too. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Well, I hope you like my little song. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
No, because at a certain point, this is another of the curiosities, is that the internal passageway system of the Great Pyramid was deliberately blocked with gigantic granite blocking stones. So when the Ma'mun and his team broke in, they didn't know exactly where they were going. But as they'd got deeper into that cavern that you were showing us, as they'd got deeper into that, hammering away, they suddenly heard something very large falling in a nearby space. There was a space nearby where something huge fell. And that struck them as interesting. They knew where the sound came from. They started heading for that. And they found themselves in what is called the ascending corridor of the Great Pyramid. And underneath them, behind where they cut in, were these huge granite huge granite blocking stones, which blocked that passageway. But they had gone round them and found themselves in the passageway system. And from there, it was clear running. They could go up the ascending corridor. They could enter the Queen's Chamber. They could then continue on up the Grand Gallery, and they could come to the King's Chamber. That was the situation once they'd broken in and found the original system. What you're walking through is a man-made tunnel broken in by force. It's a tunnel that was broken into by force, roughly hacked out of the body of the Great Pyramid, which fortunately accidentally led to this, which is the ascending corridor. Yes, okay. The complications of the Great Pyramid are beyond belief. There's an ascending corridor, but there's also a descending corridor. No, those stairs have been put in modern times.
Okay, got it.
They did not exist. Let's keep on going down. No, yeah, let's go down. Let's go down to the descending corridor. No, we're in the Queen's Chamber. No, we're not quite going the right way at the moment. We're going up. But there's two ways. You can go up or you can go down. And we did see the down view there. This is it. Then you come into the so-called subterranean chamber, cut out of bedrock 100 feet beneath the base of the Great Pyramid. When you come up that, you then join the junction of that and the Grand Gallery, and you can then continue all the way up to the top. You're going up hundreds of feet at a slope of 26 degrees. And by the way, that's worth making a point of too, because the external slope of the Great Pyramid is 52 degrees. And every corridor, every passageway within the Great Pyramid slopes at 26 degrees. That's, of course, half of 52. So we know that geometers and mathematicians were at work. it's not an easy, once you get to the Grand Gallery, it's fine because that's almost 30 feet high. But when you're going up the ascending corridor or going down the ascending corridor, you're in a passageway, I should call it. You're in a passage that is about 3 feet 5 inches in height. Now, that means that you're going to have to bend over double pretty much to go down it. And what I've learned from years of exploration of the Great Pyramid is that if you're going down one of those passageways, it's better to go down backwards because then you don't keep smashing your head on the top of it. If you go down forwards, you're going to bump your head 5 times by the time you get to the bottom. But if you go down backwards, that doesn't happen. Anyway, it's very difficult to, particularly for anybody who's unwell, to actually go.
Meet the new iSIMS, the single talent acquisition platform that's fully future-ready. It works wherever and however you hire, with insights no one else offers. One solution that fits seamlessly into your existing tech stack, which is why IT and HR leaders trust it. With the best of enterprise-grade software and AI, iSIMS helps you identify and secure the right talent faster. iSIMS, powering exceptional hiring. Learn more at isims.com.
Up there.